This generation of gaming has been unprecedented in many ways, but one facet I'd like to focus on today is cross-gen games. When a new generation of consoles release, there will inevitably be games that release on both the next and previous gen consoles. Financially, it makes sense for game studios, of course, but eventually games move to exclusively next-gen consoles, usually within 1 to 2 years after the new console's release. But this generation, of course, had manufacturing delays because of COVID and scalping problems, so cross-gen games persisted far longer than usual. In other words, the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X generation has been plagued by cross-gen releases. Now, these games are doing good things. For the past few years, everyone not able to get the next-gen consoles were able to play these new games on the previous gen. It also allows more people to enjoy games without needing to spend extra money on a new console. It also allows devs and studios to receive far more sales than they would have by releasing it on only one generation. Again, I believe this was acceptable until 2022. You had great games like Horizon Forbidden West and God of War Ragnarok that were extremely well optimized on last-gen consoles. Some wondered how these games could run on these old systems, but the answer to this question tugs at the heart of the problem. They run well on last gen because they were developed with last gen in mind. Devs could not just create a game from the ground up utilizing next gen features entirely and simply port it back to last gen, at least not without heavily compromising the last gen versions of the game. One example of a next-gen feature is, of course, SSD loading. A great example of this not being utilized is in God of War Ragnarok. Specifically, look at the boat traversal here. This is quite obviously a loading screen, which is needed for PlayStation 4, but obviously not the PlayStation 5. However, it would take a lot of work and money to change all this just for the PS5 version, so it's left the same.
Could you be any slower?
Spider-Man 2 is a game that could not run on last-gen consoles, plain and simple. The instant loading, performance, and visuals are all next-gen features here. Could they go back and release it on the previous generation after the fact? Sure, they could try, but the state of the game would be horrible. We have a recent example of this. Mortal Kombat 1 released on next-gen consoles only, and the visuals are impressive. However, they went ahead and released a Switch version of the game after the fact. Simply put, the game performed and looked horrible, and I mean horrible. They also charged full price knowing all of this, by the way. Anyway, I know the Switch is not as powerful as the PS4 or Xbox One, but this is also a game that is not exactly intensive. The game pretty much has a 2D viewing angle with a fixed camera, so nothing needs to be rendered behind that camera. The stage behind the characters don't have a lot going on either. Given all this, it still runs horribly on the Switch and likely not that better if it were released on PS4 or Xbox One. It seems to purely be a business decision as to why they would release it only on Switch. But all this shows is that when you develop a next-gen game only, porting it back to the previous generation is a hard or impossible task. Ultimately, you get the point. This is what you would be in for if studios tried to take a game that was supposed to only be for PS5 or Series X and put it on the previous gen after the fact. Nobody wants that. Unfortunately, these cross-gen games are also giving the PS5 and Series X a bad rap. I don't know how many times people have said, wow, there's almost no difference between the PS4 and 5 versions of Forbidden West or Ragnarok. Or, gee, next gen isn't really that good, it only improves FPS. To those people I say this is misguided. The difference would have been night and day if either of those games were developed from the ground up for the PS5 or Series X. Once again, Spider-Man 2 proves this alone. It has consistently great performance, but is a major step up from 2018 Spider-Man's graphics and details. Now we are almost to 2024 and times are finally starting to change, but major AAA cross-gen games persist. In August, Armored Core 6 released on current and last-gen consoles. For PS4 and Xbox One, the game doesn't look that bad and it's locked at 30 FPS, but it's a game that deserves to be played at least 60 FPS. I would rather have had the developer, From Software, develop and tune the game to run at 4K 60 or a lower resolution at 120 FPS on current-gen consoles. Or they could have also enhanced the graphics while maintaining at least 60 FPS. For how beautiful the art direction and game is, it's unfortunate that it could have looked even better if it was not developed for last gen, which ultimately held the game back technically. The same can be said for Assassin's Creed Mirage. Ubisoft's decision to release this game for both generations is simple, and it goes back to what I said earlier. Devs and studios get more sales with cross-gen games. They needed as many sales as possible because the company's not exactly doing well right now. It's a shame because it's been 3 years since Valhalla, so this game could have been a noticeable step up in performance and visuals, yet it's either on par or only slightly better than Valhalla. The truth is harsh, cross-gen games are holding this generation back, and it will only change once devs start releasing their games only for this generation. Of course, there will always be games that are less intensive that can be a cross-gen release, such as Sonic Superstars, etc., but I am not talking about those games. I'm talking about premium new AAA titles that push the industry forward, the way it has been for decades. It's interesting, because up until this generation, it was a given. You want a current-gen experience, then you pay for a current-gen console. Now, many are asking why they need to pay for a new console years after its release to play current-gen games. It's a dangerous cycle. Devs could try to appease last-gen gamers by releasing cross-gen games, but it heavily hinders the progress forward that this generation needs. Not to mention we get less current-gen exclusives, which is terrible since exclusives market and sell systems. Now, is all this the worst problem in the world? No, but this will cause one of two scenarios to happen. One, it inevitably lengthens the console's life cycle. Games at the end of a console's life push the hardware to its limits because devs have worked on that console a lot by then. Naughty Dog released Uncharted 1, 2, and 3 before The Last of Us released in 2013, a few months before the PS4 came out. Because of only working on one console for this long, they created The Last of Us with an unreal visual fidelity on that console. Because cross-gen games keep releasing, it is going to take that much longer for games to fully utilize these current-gen consoles. However, if the life cycle is not extended, then that means this generation of consoles will not achieve their full potential. What I mean is, this generation could be known for all these amazing games with instant loading, great graphics, and seamless gameplay. However, if these AAA cross-gen games keep being released, it would instead be known as the generation that's mediocre, one that has barely progressed forward. The PlayStation 4 and Xbox One released almost 10 years ago, and it was an amazing console generation with fantastic exclusives for us gamers. But it is time. It is time to move on to create games for this generation only. At this point, we're probably halfway through the current console's life cycle, so I want the next 3 to 4 years to be great. Yes, no more cross-gen games won't suddenly solve every issue this generation has, but it is a step forward in the right direction. Trust me, it's a lot better to have this rather than this. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video.